Welcoming to the show from the White Ribbon Trust, it's Rob McCann. Rob, good morning to you.
Good morning, and thanks for having us.
Oh, dude, thanks for joining us. I was thinking the other day, I know I contacted you a couple of days ago, but these shows we've been doing have been very full. I thought, I've got a good idea. No one else will think of this. I'm going to talk to White Ribbon Trust. And then I saw you on One News and I saw it all over the place. So my big brain thought that I'd got an exclusive, but obviously you had a little bit of space in the media recently to talk about the slap heard around the world and what that could mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the good and bad things about this is that when something bad happens like this, they come to us for comment. But when we want to talk about how we can actually prevent men's violence towards women, there's dead silence. So usually something terrible, whether it's a murder, someone being hurt, or an instance like this where celebrities are involved, suddenly people are actually quite interested in the messaging. It's something that we have to deal with. It's terribly frustrating because actually, in our business, we want to prevent this stuff happening, not so much to slap against a comedian. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we're trying to prevent men's violence towards women and violence in general. So getting positive messaging out in this world without using celebrities it's quite tricky. So we do have to be quite on the ball, so to speak, and ready to respond and weave messages in through whatever current event is occurring.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that we should touch base once a month. That's what I'm hearing. I'm down for that.
If I'm not too boring, we've always got stuff to talk about. And look, there are many more people involved in White Ribbon than me. We have a whole lot of ambassadors. So normally they are not famous people, just a couple are, but they are people who are genuinely interested in trying to change the trajectory that New Zealand has been on for a long time as a really, really violent country.
Yeah. No, look, and I think you're right. When I hear you saying that you're a prevention group, immediately I think of the fence at the top of the cliff rather than the ambulance at the bottom. And that means actually talking to you about before incidents happening makes more sense than, as you're saying, as a reflective thing once things have already been done, because ultimately we want to stop the violence before it happens, not reflect on the violence that has just happened. That's basically what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But the tough thing about that is that most of us think, oh, well, it's not going to happen to me. It doesn't happen in my family, so it doesn't affect me. And then when they see a person on TV who reflects them, then they go, oh my goodness, well, now I am upset. So it's quite hard to make that connection because it's not like the SPCA where we all absolutely care about lovely fluffy animals and we want to look after them all the time. People just don't think the issue of violence occurring in families, domestic violence, is anything to do with them in many cases. And so they allow the conditions that help shape men to use violence to occur. So, and that's one of the tricky things, because violence isn't just about people being angry. We all get angry. We all slam down our coffee cup or whatever from time to time. And we all say stupid things in relationships because we're human beings. Yeah. But what often men are taught is, how do we solve our problems through violence? So we talk about healthy relationships, trying to spin it round, and what healthy masculinity looks like. Because when you talk about toxic masculinity, men's eyes glaze over and they think, oh, well, you're blaming me for all the ills of the world. But so what we do is we ask questions like, have you heard some of these outdated phrases? And I'll just ask you, did you ever play sport when you were younger and your coach said, don't play like a girl?
Honest answer, I can't really recall that, but if I was being doubly honest, I'd go probably. I mean, that would be a fairly common thing to hear. Off the top of my head, I don't ever remember that being said to me, but I suspect it probably was.
What about boys don't cry or harden up, toughen up?
I don't know, maybe I grew up in a balanced and emotionally safe situation.
This is why I'm not the interviewer.
No, I have to say I've got a really shitty memory as well. Yeah. So my suspicions are that I did hear those things, but I guess what I'm saying and being honest is, like, off the top of my head, I I don't know if I think everyone's heard Harden Up. I've certainly heard Harden Up. Yeah, for sure.
So we did some research a couple of years ago because, my memory too is not great, but I do remember hearing all of those things because I did play sport and I went to a boarding school and it was,
Same.
it was very much an old-fashioned English setup. The reality is a lot of men and women heard those comments over the time. I'm over 50 now, so we are talking about that generation. But we are the same people who then pass on how we expect other people to behave, and we pass on to our children, all of these things, not just DNA, but they learn from watching us and how we behave. So when you try and compact men into this, what we call a man box, by saying that you've got to be tough, you've got to be strong, don't show emotion. I mean, when I grew up, All Blacks never cried. They could lose a scrotum. They just keep playing, broken arm, just keep playing. Nowadays, from the PR, there's a lot of crying that goes on when you're caught out doing something bad. But it's a huge change that we are seeing in society. My dad was loving and caring, but he didn't hug me the way that I try and hug my children now, because we've decided that that's okay as men. But there's still a lot of growing and learning we need to do to ensure that our young men have the skills to actually be in relationships and be able to demonstrate a whole range of emotions, not just the one that Will Smith demonstrated the other day, which is where he's just reverting back to base.
I know, and maybe we should get into that. I mean, I know that this is not your necessarily area of expertise, or you don't necessarily want to have to associate your fantastic decades of good work with, the slap heard around the world. But the reason I think it's pertinent to bring you on to talk about it, and you've sort of said this already without using this word, but there's a modeling that's just happened on that stage in front of 1 billion, probably actually more like 5 billion people now, because who hasn't seen the replay? And that modeling was, your words have upset, actually not even upset me, but upset the person sitting next to me. So therefore I'm going to commit a violent act on you. And I was wondering, and this is probably the genesis of the whole thing I wanted to connect with you on, Rob, is that, the evidence that there is out there or not between what we see and what we do. I would imagine what you see in the family, as you've just said, we pass on to our kids, as the biggest influence. But surely there is evidence out there, or makes logical sense, that what we see in society, what we see our heroes doing. I mean, you're talking about rugby. I remember playing rugby in the 80s and 90s, and how we used to ruck in rugby, and we would want to do it like Richard Lowe did, and he was a mongrel, but that was the example of what a hard man rucking would do. So we modeled off what we saw our heroes doing, and that's the kind of genesis of the conversation I wanted to have with you about what evidence there is, or certainly what of, what a 19-year-old boy now has seen, what, and to be honest, and not much of really a pushback. I know that he has apologized in that, but not really. There's still a lot of justifying going on there. So it still comes across a little bit like, I'm unhappy with your words, therefore I'm going to commit a violent act on you. So can you speak to that and speak to the modeling and the example set by us, especially outside of the family home, how much of an influence that has on us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can go further than that. So I agree with your point that we do suck in what we see on TV or wherever from our heroes. It's absolutely true. But we also do it from other sources as well. When you are talking to young men and women about pornography, and or looking at the research, the attitudes and behavior that young men and women have around sex is absolutely influenced by what they see, which we'll call media, for want of a better word, and they're accessing it. And in my day, there were a couple of magazines that would be hidden under a bed. It was still harmful because it just portrayed women's objects, but compared to the harm that we see caused by it now, where many young men and women don't see the difference between that version, where there are some really poorly paid actors who are doing things that many normal people can't do. We're seeing young women with serious health conditions because of what they're being forced to do or what they think they have to do. And we're seeing lots of young men use strangulation because they've seen it on a porn video and they think, well, that's normal. This is how I'm supposed to behave. And the same goes when you see your heroes do shit. And we've just, I was just speaking the other day and listening to some research about gender studies, and men still believe that if they're insulted, etc., in our country, that they should respond violently. They think if they walk away from a fight, they're less of a man. We've still got that stuff ingrained in us, and when you see a hero do it, you go, that's, I've got to emulate that.
Well, it normalizes it. I think that's the word you've used. It normalizes it. I mean, this was normalized, that because you kind of go, well, if it's okay for this, 300 millionaire to do this in front of 1 billion people, of course it's okay for me to do it on my school field or on my, whatever, because if they're allowed to do it and they've got much higher stakes than I have, then of course I'm allowed to do it. So, and also I was thinking, and we've all seen, I'm sure, the responses by many justifying Will Smith's actions. So not only is it an example of violence that is modeled, there is also a sector of society, I won't say it's the majority, but certainly a sector that if you go, data mining for it, you'll find it pretty easily, that are also saying, yep, Chris Rock got what he deserved. And some from some very high profile people talking about, don't talk about women's hair like that. I mean, that's another whole conversation around the cultural issues around here and that sort of thing. But you're never going to convince me that let's even be generous in saying a terribly unkind joke about someone's hair and condition warrants a violent act. No matter how wrong Chris Rock was for picking on it, if he was wrong at all, and I'll say that, but I'm being generous saying, let's say he was completely in the wrong with his joke, the response was disproportionate to a point that I do wonder about. Are we going to see, kids getting in trouble or other people emulating it and then directly citing this incident as a reason for it being normalized?
Well, I think you're right. It's really unfortunate that we're all helping to blow up the incident. I mean, there's just no way of ignoring that. And social media does that. It takes something, anything, and just continues to push it out there. But, people will react because they will have seen their hero do this. And the other thing we have to remember is when we are angry, we are, in many cases, people stop thinking as rationally as they should do. We emphasize the need for a call-in culture, the idea that actually if you want to create any type of change, you've got to do it in a respectful and polite manner. And one of the things that we talk about is that, when you're angry, that's not the right time to have those kinds of discussions. Make a joke, walk away, wait till everyone's calmed down. And certainly, I've seen some good writing about what Will Smith could have done, which he could have stood up there and he could have dissed Chris Rock in a really, really significant manner in front of the world stage, and there would be only one winner and loser in this. But he chose anger. Also, other commentators saying that, well, it's actually his ownership of his wife's reputation, etc. All the people I've heard say that she is quite capable of actually dealing with this herself rather than that ownership. I have to protect my woman, etc. And this is quite different from a physical altercation where you'd protect your child or something from a physical altercation. This is quite separate. It just feels to me that, and I don't want to get on the bandwagon of banging one or the other, but that his ego was bruised and he responded in a way that many men do.
I'll get on the bandwagon. I think absolutely. I have no problems jumping on the bandwagon and picking one side over the other in this, because we don't need to kind of get into it's been looked over 1 million times, but it seems to me that he did actually react appropriately to start with, which was, I don't like this joke, but I'm going to politely clap and laugh. And then his wife was very upset, and then he reacted. So I think it's and the point you're making, which I think we probably leave it here, Rob, but the point you're making about how he could have responded is still so. I mean, this would be the example. If he had responded with his words to someone who offended him with their words, then it would have been the dick Chris Rock would be talking about today, and what the disgusting joke he made about this woman who's suffering from a autoimmune issue. But because he didn't and Will Smith, his persona of being a good guy, a nice guy, and a protector would have been magnified, not minimized, by him choosing violence. And that's the other thing, I guess. And I mean, if we don't have to rush off. If you wanted to speak to this in 60 seconds, is that how do we teach people that when they go to the lowest common denominator, and I'm saying that's violence, I don't know what you'd say about that, then actually everything they're trying to achieve will be harmed, versus, you know, sticking with a more appropriate response where perhaps everything they're trying to achieve will be enhanced. And Will Smith is the example. If he had used his words from that pulpit and talked about alopecia and the harm that it's causing and the hurt that it's causing, you know, alopecia around the world probably would have got billions of dollars of donations that day, and he would have been seen as a hero and a spokesperson, but it was the opposite that happened.
Look, I can only agree to you and put a plug for the free resources that we've got there. And it's, you know, Google Call in Culture on the White Ribbon website. And, you know, there's a whole set of tips there about how you can have those discussions, whatever it's about, in a respectful way to actually generate change. And that's what you're talking about. Will Smith had an opportunity to generate some change in a respectful manner. He got it horridly wrong, and he'll pay the consequences for that. You know, he's always going to remain a terribly rich person. But his, you know, his epic achievement has been somewhat sullied by absolutely terrible behavior.
I guess, without getting into a debate with you over it, the question now is, will he pay the price? You know, celebrity and profile people and wealthy people often can get away with things that the rest of us can't. That is yet to be seen, but that's probably not a conversation for you or I. Here's the website, whiteribbon.org.nz. As you see, scroll down to the Call in Culture bits and pieces there, which Rob just talked about from the White Ribbon Trust. That is Rob McCann. Rob, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights.
You're most welcome. Thanks.